Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wheeler Centre. It's a great pleasure to be here and to indulge in a little bit of interesting conversation on this cold Thursday evening. My name is Jane Montgomery Griffiths, and I am the Director of the Centre for Theatre and Performance Studies at Monash University. And before kicking off and introducing you all to our highly esteemed panel, I would like to give a little bit of a warning here. Because when I was asked to do this panel, I was very honoured, but I have to be honest, I thought, what the heck do I know about masculine performativity? Because I spend most of my time researching dead Greek women. And then I remember that this time last year I was playing Sir Stephen in a production of The Story of O over at MTC, and suddenly it all became clear, because who better to talk about masculine performativity than a feminist lesbian with a strap-on rolling pin? So consequently, I'm now feeling thoroughly adept in the subject. I have Wikipedia'd men. And as any true academic, I had a quick Google of the term masculinity, and I know all about it now. So if anybody has any teenage sons out there, I have the answers. But before moving on to the nitty-gritty of what's going on in the underpants of 18-year-old boys, I'm going to introduce us all to our panel. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Paul Capsis. Now, Paul is a man who probably needs no introduction, but it's a great pleasure to have him here, an extraordinary cabaret artist, a wonderful actor. Anyone who was lucky enough to see Angela's Kitchen at Malthouse will know what a very moving performer he is too. I also, I don't know if you know this, Paul, I have a little secret here. Next month, I am going to be helping to develop a work, Calpurnia Descending, which Paul is starring in at Malthouse Theatre later in the year. And I am going to be playing Paul, playing Bette Davis, playing Gloria Swanson. And he knew nothing about this. There you go. So it's news, but I'm just chuffed I get to play Paul Capsis. I'm growing my hair especially. Which actually raises an interesting point in terms of the gender performativity of hair, which we shall come to later. So, Paul Capsis, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. Now, I found a fantastic quote originally by which to introduce our next participant, Zoe Coombs Marr, but I'm actually wondering whether it's more relevant to Paul, if you'll forgive me reading this. Describing gender relations has become more complex since a man could confidently assert that women's hair grows longer because it waves and screens the delicate shoulders from injuries which might be sustained by free exposure to air. I was hoping... Thank you very much. That was from Alexander Rowland in 1853. I was hoping that Zoe would take out a pin and go like that, and we would have a cascade of wonderful locks, of tonsury excitement going on. But, oh, yes, thank you. Excellent.
Yeah,
Wasn't
baby.
even planned. Yeah. Now, this is particularly relevant because Zoe Coombs Marr is a wonderful performer, a comedian, and author, creator, deviser, performer of a fantastic show called Dave, which we shall talk about shortly. So it's a joy to have you here, Zoe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi.
I haven't dared ask our next participant what is under his beanie. Oh, okay.
Male pattern baldness.
So, further evidence of the importance of hair when it comes to performing gender. So our next guest is Jez Pez, who is a queer trans activist, performer, educator, editor of Dude magazine.
All-round champ.
All-round champ. And it's a joy to have you here, Jez. Thank you very much. And finally, the wonderful Roslyn Oades, who is a performer, a verbatim theatre maker, will be directing a show at Malthouse later in this year, has the claim to fame, which is not insignificant if, like me, you are the mother of small daughters, of being the voice for Zigbee, the zebra.
No, not the zebra, his cousin and one of the monkeys.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, that's not the same.
No,
Suddenly all the street cred's gone. But as well as being a wonderful verbatim theatre maker, is also a fantastic voice-over artist, and I shall watch ABC2 with added interest from now on. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to be discussing various levels of actually what is masculinity, how we perform masculinity nowadays, whether there is a crisis in masculinity. An interesting thing happens to me sometimes in my role as an academic, which is that I get to see slightly angst-ridden young men. And I recently had a little deputation from the 4 heterosexual men in our 3rd year, who, they're not here, are they? I'm just checking.
As if they're going to say, yep.
Yeah, well, you never know. I'm always saying go out, go and see something. So they came to me and they said that they felt very uncomfortable because of all this feminism we were teaching. And they didn't feel able to speak or to participate in class. And as an educator, I found this very sad, because everyone should feel that there is a safe environment to communicate and to participate. But I also thought, fellas, this is the only time in your life as a heterosexual white male you're going to be disadvantaged. Bloody hell. It also made me realise, though, that there was a degree of anxiety going on with these young men. How can they perform their masculinity if they're trying to be intelligent, sensitive, affective and effective human beings? And they were confused. And that moved me a great deal, and it made me think there's actually something very serious we need to discuss about with this. So I would like to start the discussion by asking the panel how you feel about performativity of gender, what masculinity means, and then we'll move on to Ros, because you have a very interesting take on this. So, Paul, can I ask you, what's your definition of masculinity, and do you feel there's a crisis in masculinity?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been very acute to me of late. It's something I've just become more aware of, that men are really stuck in a strange place. It's like, I can't explain it. I always felt since really young that men performed masculinity, because I didn't understand how you acquire it or access that, because I couldn't. I had no idea. It just wasn't natural to me to be male. I still don't think now for me the difficulty is when in theatre I have to play a male, I kind of really have to research and watch, because it's not something that's natural to me. What's always been very natural to me is femininity. I've always had that, and I still have that. But I used to cringe. I used to think, why is men acting like these boys have to put it on? You know, I hated all that. Repulsed me. But then what happened to me was they reflected back to me that as a guy I wasn't supposed to be feminine. And I was punished for that, you know. But I feel now, in particular in time where we are, is that I think men seem to be really fucked up and lost and just really struggling. It's weird. I feel sorry for them too. I mean, they look at me like, you know, I'm a weirdo, freak, whatever, but it's weird, isn't it? I agree. I think absolutely. I don't know. I think, you know, some men have it naturally. More and more men I feel like are able to be feminine at the risk of, you know, being labelled gay, or, you know, I meet more and more heterosexual men now who are very feminine and who seem free with it. But obviously that's kind of like a minority. You know, I just wish people could just be themselves, regardless if you're feminine or you're masculine, or if you're a woman and you're masculine and you're, you know, I think it should just be yourself. And I kind of, been my whole life thing, is just to be myself, regardless of the punishment or the, you know, where people place you especially if you're a performer, you know. But in a way, because I went through school with all that, I felt like as a performer, then it was just something I accepted and just kept working with what I've got, you know. And I've played more women than I have men in theatre.
Zoe, you've spent a lot of time actually working on how a rather charming, affable but sexist young man might respond. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think, for those of you who I assume is the majority of people here who haven't seen my show, and thanks a lot, Dave, so I'm a stand-up comedian and I've been doing that for a really long time. And Dave is a stand-up show but performed as a man. And I first I guess I have firstly as a big, you know, as a lesbian feminist, I don't particularly care about men that much in my life. They don't really concern me that much. I feel for them sometimes, but not. I can't even. Anyway, but you know, you do have to deal with them on a day-to-day basis, but I do. As a comedian, I kept encountering this thing where, you know, I've always felt that gender was very performed because I was never particularly feminine, and it was always I think masculinity as a performed thing it's not an essential type of thing. It's performed. It's a collection of other things that make you something. It's not like, you know, like it's like being a dickhead or something. If you do dickheady things, then you are a dickhead. If you do like feminine things, then you are feminine or masculine. Not that all men are dickheads. I'm not saying that. But I think in performing comedy, something that I found was there was this real performed thing, because stand-up is a performed thing. It's a persona, but then it's a very masculine one. And I found myself going, it's quite a horrible realm to be in as a woman. It's not very fun a lot of the time to be a woman in a stand-up context for lots of reasons. And it's about the way that you perform, the persona that you inhabit, and the way that you're received. And so I really wanted to take on that masculine performance and see what I could do within it. And it's incredibly freeing and really fun because it is a performed identity. It's really easy for an audience just to slip into believing you and then responding to you in the way that they respond to a man, which is very different to the way that they respond to a woman, which is, but at the same time, they're really aware that you're not a man. So it kind of, people respond in this way where they're like, their natural responses are occurring, and then a second later they're going, oh, but it's not really, oh God, I just realised that I responded in a different way because I thought she was a man, and now and then they have to sort of question their own responses, which is a really fun place to inhabit, I think. But it didn't really answer your question or anything. It was just a stream of consciousness, but hey.
That's what we enjoyed it. We might get round to an answer later.
Sorry.
Now, Jez, you come from with a fascinating perspective on this. So in terms of what is the definition of masculinity, and is there a crisis with this? What do you think?
Excuse me while I clear my throat. I agree. I think there is definitely a crisis, and I guess I have experience of living as a woman, as a man, because you introduced me as a trans man, which means I was assigned female at birth, and I've transitioned to become a man. So even though I'm not an academic, which I don't apologise for, I feel like I've done a PhD in masculine performativity. I feel like trying to embody my identity, I took a lot of notice around me on how men behave, and I noticed that a lot of men behave differently. And I think a lot of men behave differently depending on the context, depending on who they're around, whether they're in a group of their peers or family or people they look up to, whether there is a woman in the group or not, or whether they think a woman is an earshot. I've been in spaces where nobody knows I'm trans, and I'm around a group of men who feel like they can speak freely about women, and it's disgusting, you know. it's awful, and I do think, you know, I'm not speaking for all men, because there still are beautiful men that deal with this stuff and attempt to be politically intelligent and you know, have good views and beliefs around feminism and support and evolve and try to grow and take that on. But there's definitely a lot of men that present themselves differently to society or public, and then within the safety of their man circle will behave in certain ways. And I think it's about penetrating that, and it's about looking at that space and going, what is it about this space that makes individual men curtailed to the pressure of the group? And, you know, I notice it because if I'm in that group, they behave that way, and then if I'm individually with them, they will actually feel different with me and speak to a deeper level or speak to their feelings more. So I think that individually men are grappling with the pressure of having to always be hypermasculine and fit a certain macho, you know, character. But that's, you know, of course that's based on context, it's based on generation. I think that there's a big difference between, you know, my father's generation, who were socialised not to speak about their feelings, compared to, you know, people that are in their 20s and 30s now. I mean, a funny story is that, because that was like, whoa, heavy. You know, when I was transitioning, I used to experiment with the barbershops and go there, because that's like, you know, ultimate masculine experience, like bro out with the barber. And he was like describing some handshake that Mark Latham did with John Howard at some point. I don't know if anyone ever remembers when he lost and he did that handshake. And it was like, whoa, look at that aggressive I lost handshake. You know, and then he practiced it on me. And I swear to God, snapped something in my hand. You know, it was like, oh my God, that was so over the top. So then I started researching handshakes. And there's like this whole psychology around men handshaking and the different kinds of handshakes that they do, and it can tell a lot about someone's personality. And also I really had to toughen up my handshakes, because like people really overcompensate getting the, you know, and there's like the open, I'm friendly, you know, nice to meet you, there's the don't come near me, you know, or I'm going to like top you kind of handshake, and you know, there's like the double grip kind of. So I think masculinity, yes, is total performance, but yeah.
I think that's called the reach around.
Yeah, the reach around. Oh, no one's done that, maybe tonight, yeah.
And then there's the wet fish, which you can get from any gender.
Is that after the toilet or what?
That's yeah. But it was interesting because I have to say that you've just way more coherently answered that question than any of the tedious academic stuff I've been reading in preparation for this panel. One of the tedious academic things I was reading in preparation was the suggestion that the crisis in masculinity is because men cannot be violent anymore, and that, as you said, violence equals being macho, which equals being masculine. So, Ros, you've had a fascinating experience through your verbatim theatre research in this, and I was wondering if you'd like to talk to that.
Yeah, because I feel like what I can offer is observations. I've just made a show, a couple of years ago, I made a show called I'm Your Man, which was set in the world of professional boxing, and I developed a real interest in that kind of really hyper-masculine, macho persona, which I do think is definitely a performance. But I kind of, the work I made before that led into making I'm Your Man. The show I made before was called Stories of Love and Hate, and I made it in response to the Cronulla riots. At the time, I was living in Bankstown, which is where I grew up, which is a suburb of Western Sydney. It's also the heart of Arab Australia. It's where Lakemba Mosque is. It's the go-to place for a comment on any hot issues involving Arab Australians. And so, of course, the Cronulla riots really affected the area I was living in that it was basically a war of sorts between tribes of young men in the Sutherland Shire and tribes of young men in the Bankstown area where I was living. And it was interesting to me, time and again, speaking to these young men, that the young men in the Shire would talk about, now I know what it feels like to be at Gallipoli. There's this real kind of longing for this, you know, really nostalgic sense of masculinity where you took big risks, you put your life on the line for something you really believed in. And also the Arab Australian men said, it was like being in the Lebanese war. There were so many guns, man. And it was also really interesting to see culture being performed as well in that context, because a lot of the young Arab Australian men I knew in Bankstown, they weren't actually Lebanese, but suddenly everyone was Lebanese, because if you were Lebanese, you were like a thug and you were a gangster, and it was a cool thing to be. So even that was really interesting to observe happening. So because, I was really interested in this psychology of respect, which kind of led me into the world of professional boxing. And I think it's really interesting, that world to me. I guess if there is a vulnerability to it, because all those boxers, they talk like, I'm going to win, I'm going to smash him, I'm the best. But the only thing that's certain when you're a professional boxer is you're going to eventually lose. So I was really interested in mapping that psychology of respect in that context in my work.
And earlier, when you were in the UK doing some research, you had a really interesting interview, didn't you? You've developed a monologue based on this.
Yeah, should I
yes,
jump
please,
up?
That'd be great.
So in my work, I work in a form, I've kind of been pioneering a form of performance I call headphone verbatim, which I've been working on for the last 14 years in my work. So essentially, my actors, I don't perform in my shows. My actors, I do recordings, and I give my actors headphones, and they speak along to recordings that are being played in their ears as precisely as possible. And I guess this is partly, related, obviously, to my interest in being a voice artist. I actually have a belief that everyone's voice is as unique as a fingerprint, and so if you can recreate their vocal print in performance, you almost conjure their essence, almost like channeling someone. So I'm going to perform for you a male I interviewed in London. So I'm just going to be saying what he said exactly as he said it, as close as possible. And I'm really interested in mismatch in my work. So what happens if, in this case, a woman is saying the words of a man? I'm not trying to parody him or characterise him. I'm just trying to say what he said as he said it. So I'll stop talking and just do that. So this is CJ. He's a boxing trainer, so this was kind of the beginning of my process on I'm Your Man. I used to work as a driver for DHL, so I've had a lot of run-ins. I had a guy, Roy knows about it. Big Irish guy, I was about 6 foot tall, come out, I was delivering in my little uniform and everything and the guy cut the van up. And DHL policy is you don't argue with anyone, because you got DHL written all over you, you work that area, you got to bump into these people, maybe not today, maybe next week. You don't need that sort of thing. Anyway, this guy cut the van up. He was really hyper about something. So he's cut the van up, got out, he started swearing at me. I had the window down, I didn't get out of the van, spat in my face. So I'm like, fuck it, I just leave it. Like, the guy was a big guy, he maybe not as tall as him, but as I said, heavier build than him. He's a good, must have been in his 50s, late 40s, early 50s, but really Irish guy, Irish men, always strong anyway. So that was his other day. I had a delivery to do at the same end of the road, the direction he was going on. So I'm furious now, and I phoned up the DHL, my office, and I'm look like I just had an incident. I'm really worked up because I get really worked up. Anyway, so I've just driven, I just let them know. I've driven halfway up, and then I've stopped. He stopped, thinking I've stopped because of him. I'm only a delivery to do. So, anyway, he's got out and I've got out and I'm thinking, right, I've had enough now because you swore at me, plus you spat at me and now you're still trying to carry it on. And just don't... So, anyway, police record. I'm sure you're the police. You sure you're not the old Bill? He had a broken leg and what happened is he's come out of his car towards my van, which I was standing outside. He's come out, he's thrown a punch at me. I've just got out of the way, and he ended up hitting the front of the van half a dozen times. And I kicked his leg, because he's a big guy, and when I kicked his leg, I broke his leg, just below the ankle there.
So that was the end of him then. And the police came. People called the police at the scene, and they thought, oh, he was involved in a car accident. But it was a big lump. And anyway, the great thing about it is I'll give him a lot of respect, because they asked him if he was going to carry out charges against me. But he said, no, I won't carry it out. And he put his hand out and he shook my hand. And he was like, because he knew he started it. And that's right, because he started it. It could be me I'd have been in the ambulance, but it was him going in the ambulance. He was just, I think he was just happy he had a good fight and he'd come out the worst. And so I was like, oh. And the police just give me a warning saying I should have stayed in the van, but I'm like, well, I was in the van. I was just trying to do delivery. I had a packet in my hand as well.
That was great, thank you. So we had everything from violence to handshakes.
Yeah,
more handshakes.
I love that about the handshakes.
But what I love about that, though, is you are a slight woman who is in no way a boxer, though you have had boxing training. But yet we can tell by the speech patterns the masculinity of that. So I guess the question to open up to everyone is how do we go about actually performing masculinity, both as performers but also as people? And do we need to? Is it necessary? I mean, you were saying, well, in individual ways, you've all been saying it'd be nice if we could just be who we are. But is there something, certainly in our social setup, that means we have to perform an identity of gender to fit in? To sort of, have an identity. Can you have an identity without being masculine or feminine? So, as people and also as performers, how do you go about creating your own performance of identity of gender? I'm looking at you just because of your hair, Zoe.
I don't know. I think it's a tricky one, because I think it's really difficult to define yourself using vocabularies that don't exist. I mean, we have sort of a limit, and by vocabulary I mean sort of, the way that we're defined, because we're only part of who defines our identity, and a lot of it is defined by the way that people view us and the rest of the world. So I think it's very difficult. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's very difficult to exist outside of gender. And people who do try to do that, I mean, there is, like a whole gender queer type of world out there, but I think it is very, very difficult, and it's always, people are always being put in boxes as like a feminine man or a masculine woman, or so I think it's very, very difficult. And I think being yourself as well is, what is yourself? It's, I was thinking about this on the way here. It's like, and you're never, because we sort of need to, our identities are made up of all these tiny little things that have to form some sort of cohesive whole, so that we aren't just erratic, strange, systems of actions. Otherwise, no one would be able to communicate with us. It's like, I was thinking about things like, when you're, if you think about cliches, like teenage lesbians love hockey, which is true, but it's not because
in my
of,
case.
No, no, not in mine either. But I liked rowing, but it's it's not because it's because you're seeking other people out, and it's because it's not because there's some intrinsic hockey gene that's tied to like the lesbian gene. It's because that's where all the other dykes are. So it's sort of, you have to kind of define yourself according to how you understand people are going to read you and what you want to get out of the world, I think.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that with Paul, you were saying how you've always felt more comfortable acting a woman and feeling that, I'm going to say, for want of a better word, femininity, because I think the definition of femininity is actually tricky, and there can often be a critical element to it. And then, Jez, you always knew you were born into a female body, but you always knew you were a man. Mm-hmm. So is that a spectrum then? I mean, do you think that there is a spectrum between identifying yourself and knowing? How do you draw that line? How do you know you're a man but you feel more comfortable acting a woman.
Well, I thought I was a woman, and I talked about... Who was here yesterday? Hands up. 2 people. I said that... what I spoke about was that I thought I was female. And I can remember the day, like yesterday, that when I was told that I was a boy, and I remember screaming and stamping my feet and saying, no, because that to me was the worst thing I could have been told, was that I was a boy.
How old were you?
I think I was about 3. I know it was before I went to school. And, I wanted to play with dolls, and I wanted to dress up, and I wanted to be like women, because what I spoke about yesterday was that, to me, women were, for me, appealing and something I was drawn to. Some women, femininity, and men were these weird... I don't know what those guys are about. They don't smile, they're angry, they're all Maltese Greek, a lot of aggression, role-playing... So I didn't like it, and then I guess then by the time I went to school, then it was pretty full on, the whole that I had to be a boy, but I was still drawn to play with girls, and it was just something I just didn't understand. Maleness, it wasn't something that I liked when I was a child, but that obviously changed as I got older. And as I get older, I'm more comfortable around men. Even though some men are uncomfortable around me. I mean, I had an experience in Greece last year. I went to Greece for the first time, and I ended up on this little island called Castellorizo, population 400. And I thought, I'm not in Surrey Hills anymore. I'm walking around, big hair, and I just had thongs and shorts and T-shirt. I didn't think I was doing anything particularly outrageous. But the men were reacted in a very negative way towards me, and so did the women on the island. They were like... Wasn't fun. Even though there was an army base on the island, men in couples all over the place, gorgeous Greek men, hot, but really confronted by me. I thought that was interesting. But when I was really young, when I was about, I guess, 12, 13, 14, and I had long hair, I used to get this reaction from men who weren't sure what I was, in a sexual way, which I didn't understand at that age, but I enjoyed it, that men would stare at me, and now I'm wrinkled and 50. It's a totally different thing, but I'm more comfortable. But I still, like when I have to perform a man, like recently I did a piece called Little Bird. One person saw it. And it was written by a heterosexual young mother. And initially I was approached about the piece because it was supposed to be about somebody who ends up in a neutral gender. And that was something for me that was interesting, because we're hearing more and more about this, and children who demand with their parents that they are girls or boys, and their parents allow them to be that, and my family didn't allow me to do that. And there was that conflict. But the piece was supposed to be about a guy who's not sure, he ends up in a relationship with a woman initially, realises he's not happy in a relationship with a woman, ends up in a relationship with a hairy man who likes to wear dresses, and then the hairy man makes this character, or encourages this character to be a woman, and then the character becomes neutral. And that's kind of where the fairy tale ended. But the thing was, it was a metaphor of a bird. And for me personally, I felt like that was sort of like letting the audience off the hook. But that's just me personally. Not that people reacted very strongly to the piece. They were very moved. And as I performed it, in my head, the character was non-gender, even though the metaphor of the bird. So performing it was coming to that place of neither female nor male, but something else in the middle. And it was I found it really moving, and often I would find myself unable to even get the words out. But the difficulty for me in that piece was I had to play the hairy dude with the dress and find this male voice, it's still kind of find it really I find it confronting for me to put that on, the male thing on, even though I'm attracted to males. I mean, I can relate to what you said earlier about, you know, enjoying the company, like I enjoy the company of men and, you know, and all that. But yeah, it's complex.
And just that you absolutely knew, didn't you, that you are a man, you are a male. So as a kid growing up, how was that clear to you?
Yeah, I had a similar experience to Paul. I thought I was a boy, you know, because when kids are little kids, everybody actually all looks the same. If you have the same haircut and you're all just wearing shorts, you all look the same. And I grew up in the 80s, and I had a short haircut, and I had lots of little boy friends, and we would go like swimming at the pool with my top off, and life was awesome. And it was when I was around 8, and as you sort of start to grow up, that's when all these social constructs kind of come spewing out of people's mouths and trying to force people into certain gender roles or behave, you know, super feminine. My parents even tried to put me into a feminizing kind of lady school.
Oh my God.
I grew up in Frankston. It was like called Jan Sheedy's finishing school or something. Man, I put my foot down on that. Imagine that. But I remember I was at the dinner table when I was 8 saying that I was a boy. And my mum said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Yes, I am. I'm a boy." And she said, No, you're not. I said, "Well, I will be when I get my sex changed."
Wow, you're a liberated kid. I love
That's
that.
very...
Yeah. So I think my mouth went, you know, it's like, and I think the next day she had a follow-up conversation going, pick a boy in our class. I said, "Why?" Oh, she said, "Just do it. Okay, Peter Maurice." Well, imagine one day when you marry Peter Maurice. You know, he's not going to like it when you start saying that you're a boy. And I was like, yeah, I guess I can see it from his point of view. But damn, I don't want to see it from a man's point of view all the time, which is like what the world constantly is. So, you know, but that was the reframing constantly for a young person growing up. Perhaps Paul can relate, or anyone in this room can relate to elders or society or constant messaging through media in trying to like fit us all into these two boxes. I think even children's clothes at one point weren't even blue and pink. They were just whites. Yeah. Probably off-white after like not being able to wash them for ages. But
what is with that? It's become more intense, hasn't it? It was so much pink for girls. It's just like...
Ugh, saturation.
I also think there's an anxiety with people, like you say, kids, they all look the same. Like babies all look like little old men, and but there will be like some parents there's a real anxiety about getting the gender of a child wrong, and they're like, "What's his name?" "It's a girl," and you're like, "I'm sorry, it looks like a potato." I don't know, but when they'll get like little girl, like babies will get their ears pierced, or they'll be bald, but they'll have that really weird bow. Like, what the heck?
That's so creepy, that thing.
So weird. But I think there's this thing from like a very young age of like, you've got to get, that's really important, and of course it's not important. I mean, and I mean, as a kid, I was kind of hearing your experience. I obviously am by no means trans, but it's quite funny that I would end up doing a lot of drag, because as a kid I used to really love tricking people into thinking that I was a boy, and then going like, "Nah, I'm not." And I remember once someone like wouldn't believe me, and so I like pulled my pants down, and I was like, "I tricked you," when I was like 5.
Yeah.
I was like, I still think it's a pretty funny joke, clearly.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've now come to the end of our time, so I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like you please to thank our panel, Roslyn Oades, Jez Pez, Zoe Coombs Marr, Paul Capsis. Thank you.